Now I'll talk about some studies about the construction of identity in a social interaction. There are multiple studies about the construction or reconstruction of identity in language use in multiple social situations, and there are so many dimensions of such studies. For example, they may reflect one's political identity or religious identity or social or even personal identity, and they are found in multiple settings also, because there are some studies which were conducted in non-native settings, and we also have studies which were conducted in native settings. All these studies lead us to think about the construction of identity in our social interaction. And in these studies, we can see that attitudes of the speakers do reflect on enactment of the identities in multiple settings. One example of such studies can be found in form of a study conducted by Cashman in 2005. He conducted a study on a group of people who were conducting a program for senior citizens in a center, and they were playing a certain game, and how they developed a talk in interaction that shows their desire or their construction of identity. And Cashman, rather than following a traditional way of looking at code switching, saw code change as a reflection of the social structure, especially a structure which was developed by urban Latino community which was involved in the discussion. Cashman observed that people involved in that discussion, they actually did identity work by their choice of various languages. And while playing this game of Loteria, which is a Mexican version of bingo, in which pictures are used to play their game instead of numbers or letters. The participants in that activity or in that game were predominantly they were bilinguals in majority, and they had proficiency in Spanish and English. And how they used Spanish and English frequently or alternatively in their communication, it had a bearing on their identity according to Cashman. For example, their use of language preference and alternation can be seen as a resource for identity work according to Cashman, such as signaling as if they were English dominant, or they were English monolingual, or Spanish dominant, or Spanish monolingual, and also as they were bilingual. So different people use their language preferences or language changes in different ways, which gave the researcher a clue to decide about their identity or their portrayal of identity as those participants wanted to portray their identity. Some portrayed themselves as English dominant, as they wanted to show that they know more English, or they want to speak English, or they have an English or English-like identity. And others predominantly used Spanish, or some of them even used both languages. So there were different reflections of their identities. Language alternation is not solely enacted on the basis of the macro social structure of the larger urban speech community. We can see that in various examples, we can see that even in our own daily use. And in the particular example from Cashman's study, we can see one of the examples which coming from one of the characters, and then it was followed by another character. The character is Adenita. She signals she is Spanish dominant. And how did she signal? Let's see. Adenita is calling a game of Loteria, which entails first shaking a jar full of bottle caps, and then taking a cap out of it, and just trying to tell other participants something about that picture. As Adanita said that a picture is on the there is a picture on the cap which she is holding, and on that picture there are certain things. A person is holding a globe up there. She's bilingual, but how she said all that in Spanish. She tried to show that she's probably Spanish dominant. Yesenia, which is the coordinator of that program, she actually translated Adanita's talk and then elaborates in Spanish. Cashman claims that she does so, uses both languages because her role as a coordinator, she needs to attend the needs of both communities or both groups, the Spanish and the English, and English speaking among the senior citizens for which that program or center was being run. The preference-related code switching is not necessarily related to speakers' communicative ability. Rather, it leads us to think about their choices of identity. For example, in the example I just mentioned, the first speaker or first participant I mentioned, Adanita, she tried to portray